The coffee was still steaming on the white marble floor when Vivian Sloane pointed at it and said two words that would unravel everything she believed about power. Clean that. She said it to a man in a faded canvas jacket, standing near a janitor's cart, a man with paper towels already in his hand, and the faint, unbothered patience of someone who had spent a long time learning not to argue with the world's small cruelties. She did not ask his name. She did not look at his shoes or his hands or the plain steel watch on his wrist that cost more than the floor he was kneeling on. She looked at the spill, then at him, the way busy people look at weather they find inconvenient, and she moved on. Her heels clicked away across the lobby toward the glass doors of the boardroom, and she was already thinking about the next problem on a list that had no bottom. What Vivian Sloane did not know, what no one standing on the 30th floor of the Halcyon Dynamics Tower knew that morning, was that the man she had just ordered to clean the floor controlled the only signature that could save her company from collapse. He was not the janitor. He was the buyer, and in 1 hour, the largest acquisition in the history of her firm would come down to whether a man she had treated like furniture decided her people were worth saving. 1 hour later, the boardroom went completely silent. Every executive at that long table stopped breathing at the same time, not because of anything Vivian said, because of a name someone else said instead, his name. And the question that followed had nothing to do with the spill or the cart or the humiliation she had handed him, without even noticing she had done it. The question was far worse than that. Does he still want to sign? The morning had started the way most of Elias Reed's mornings started, with a 7-year-old who had strong opinions about the wrongness of socks. "These are itchy," Mia announced from the hallway, holding the offending socks at arm's length like evidence in a trial. "The seam is on the inside. The seam is supposed to be on the outside, Dad. Everybody knows that." "Everybody," Elias repeated from the kitchen, where he was performing the daily miracle of converting 2 eggs and a tired loaf of bread into something a child would agree to eat. "Is everybody coming over later? Should I make more eggs?" "Dad." She gave him the look. She had inherited the look from her mother, a specific narrowing of the eyes that communicated complete and total disappointment in the intelligence of adults. It worked on him every time, and she knew it, and she deployed it without mercy. He found her the socks with the outside seams, which were in the second drawer where they always were, which she knew as well as he did, but enjoyed making him prove. She put them on, examined them with the seriousness of a building inspector, and pronounced them acceptable. Then she climbed onto the kitchen stool and asked, around a mouthful of toast, whether today was the big important day he had been not talking about all week. He paused with the spatula in the air. "What makes you think I've been not talking about something?" "You do a thing," Mia said. "When something is big, you get quiet, but it's a loud kind of quiet, like the house before a thunderstorm." She chewed. "Mrs. Aldridge taught us about barometric pressure." Elias set down the spatula and looked at his daughter, who was already moving on to the more pressing question of whether her stuffed otter could attend school in her backpack. She was right, of course. She was almost always right, in the unsettling way of children who pay attention. Today was the day. After 4 months of lawyers and data rooms and conference calls that ran past midnight, today he would sign the papers that bought Halcyon Dynamics. And the loud kind of quiet had been sitting in his chest since he woke, because Halcyon was not just a company to him. Halcyon was the building where Sarah had spent 11 years of her life. It was the place where his late wife had drawn the first sketch of a device small enough to sit inside a child's chest and steady a failing heart. And it was dying, slowly, the way good things die when the wrong people are put in charge of them. And Elias Reed had decided he was not going to stand by and watch it disappear. He drove Mia to Brightwater Elementary in a 10-year-old gray sedan with a dent in the rear quarter panel that he had never bothered to fix, because Mia had named the dent Gerald and was fond of it. The car was unremarkable in every way. which was precisely why he kept it. Elias had learned a long time ago that the most useful thing a person could be was unremarkable. People said things in front of you when they decided you didn't matter. They showed you who they were. And Elias had built an entire quiet fortune out of paying attention to the things people revealed when they thought no one important was looking. At the drop-off loop, he kissed the top of Mia's head, and she made him promise, as she did every morning, that he would be home for dinner. He promised. He always promised, and he always kept it, because there had been a year of his life when promises were the only thing he had left, and he had learned how much they weighed. "What are you making?" she asked, 1 foot already out of the car. "Spaghetti, the kind with too much garlic." "The kind that makes you cry?" "That's the onions. But yes." She considered this an acceptable arrangement, slammed the door on Gerald, and disappeared into the river of small bodies flowing through the school's front doors, her backpack already half open, and her ponytail already losing its grip on the day. Elias sat in the car for 1 full minute after she was gone. He let himself have it, that minute, the residual warmth of having been a father in the morning, before he folded it carefully away and drove into the part of the world that did not know his daughter existed. His phone buzzed on the dashboard mount. The name on the screen read Marcus Webb. Marcus ran the day-to-day at Lantern Holdings, the investment firm Elias had founded at 29 and stepped back from at 36, the year everything changed. Marcus was reliable, sharp, and constitutionally incapable of not worrying. "Tell me you're awake," Marcus said. "I'm awake. I'm driving." The Halcyon team confirmed 11 o'clock. Their counsel will be there, the board chair, the CFO, and the CEO. A pause that Elias recognized. "Vivian Sloan. You say her name like it has a splinter in it." "I've been on 6 calls with her. She's brilliant. She is exhausted, and she treats everyone in the room like they're slowing her down, including the people trying to give her $2 billion. Marcus exhaled. "Elias, I just want this clean. The board's already nervous. There's a financing window and a regulatory clock, and if anything spooks you and you decide to do your thing, my thing. Your walk away from the deal because the receptionist seemed sad thing." Elias smiled at the windshield. "I've done that exactly once. You've done it 3 times, and one of them I'm still recovering from. Just sign the papers, Elias, please. There are 4,000 people who keep their jobs if you sign, and a few thousand more kids who keep their monitors. Don't read the room today, just sign." Elias was quiet for a moment, watching the city assemble itself around him, the glass towers catching the early light. "I always read the room, Marcus," he said. "That's the only reason any of this has ever worked." And he hung up, and he drove the rest of the way listening to a country station Mia had programmed without telling him, and he did not change it. The thing Marcus had said was true, 4,000 jobs, and the monitors. Halcyon's medical division still made the pediatric cardiac monitor that Sarah had designed, a device the size of 2 stacked coins that lived under the skin and watched a child's heart so the parents could sleep, and the dying company had quietly scheduled that division for discontinuation because it was not profitable enough to justify itself to the spreadsheet. Elias had found out by accident, the way he found out most things, and the loud quiet had moved into his chest and stayed there. He was not buying a company. He was buying back his wife's reason for being, and he was buying it from people who had no idea what it was worth. He had time to kill before 11, so he did what he always did before a deal that mattered. He went early, and he walked the building. The Halcyon Dynamics Tower rose out of the financial district like an argument made in steel and glass, 32 floors of reflective ambition, with a lobby that featured a waterfall trickling down a slab of black granite for reasons no one could fully explain. Elias noticed the waterfall only long enough to calculate that its annual maintenance probably exceeded the salary of the woman scanning badges at the front desk. Then he let the thought go. He was not bitter about waterfalls. He simply could not stop himself from noticing things. He told the front desk he was early for the 11 o'clock and gave a name that was not his full one. Mr. Reed, here for the meeting. And the receptionist, harried and underpaid and dealing with a phone that would not stop ringing, waved him toward the elevator bank without really looking up. He rode to the 30th floor, the executive floor, where the signing was set to happen, and he stepped out into a corridor of polished marble and tasteful art, and the particular hush of a place where important decisions were made by people who had forgotten how to make a sandwich. And that was where the morning turned. A young man, an assistant by the look of him, badge-clipped crooked, came around the corner walking too fast and carrying a tray loaded with coffee carafes and a pyramid of pastries meant for the signing reception. He was looking at his phone. He did not see the lip where the marble met the inlaid border, and his foot caught it, and the tray went up and then came down, and the corridor filled with the wet crash of breaking ceramic and the dark bloom of coffee spreading across the white floor in a stain shaped almost exactly like a continent no one had named. The young man froze. The blood drained from his face the way it does when someone realizes they have made a mistake in a place that does not forgive mistakes. "Oh no," he whispered. "Oh no, oh no. The reception. She's going to—" And then he looked up and saw Elias standing there, an ordinary man in a canvas jacket who happened to be the nearest adult, and his eyes filled with the desperate hope of the drowning. "Hey," Elias said gently. "It's okay. Breathe. It's just coffee." There was a janitor's cart parked against the wall a few feet away, a roll of paper towels sitting on top of it. Elias did what he would have done in his own kitchen if Mia had knocked over a glass of milk. He took off his jacket, draped it over the cart, picked up the roll of paper towels, and crouched down to start clearing the worst of it before someone slipped. The young man dropped to his knees beside him, babbling thanks, gathering broken ceramic into a trembling pile. Elias was telling him to slow down, mind the sharp edges. It was honestly not a big deal, when the glass doors at the end of the corridor opened and Vivian Sloane swept in. She moved at the pace of a person who had not voluntarily slowed down in years. She was 33 years old, and she ran a $2 billion company, and she carried herself like someone perpetually arriving 10 minutes into a conversation that should have started without her. Charcoal suit, dark hair pulled back with surgical precision, a leather folio held against her side like a weapon she had not yet decided whether to use. She had spent the previous night reviewing closing conditions until 3 in the morning. She had spent the previous 4 months holding a collapsing company together with her bare hands. The acquisition that would close today was the only thing standing between Halcyon and the kind of failure that ends careers and empties buildings, and the weight of that had compressed her into something hard and fast and dangerously efficient. She saw the spill. She saw the broken ceramic, the spreading stain, the reception ruined 20 minutes before the most important meeting of her professional life. And she saw, crouched in the middle of it, a man in shirt sleeves with paper towels in his hands and a janitor's cart at his elbow. She did not see a buyer. She did not see $2 billion. She saw a problem with a solution standing in it. You. Her voice was not loud. It never needed to be. 14 years of having the final word had calibrated her tone to the exact frequency that produced obedience. She pointed one finger at the floor, at the dark continent of coffee, at the very center of it. "Clean that. The buyer's team will be up at 11, and I will not have them stepping in coffee. And get this cart out of the corridor. It looks like a loading dock." For one suspended second, the corridor held its breath. The young assistant went rigid, his mouth opening to say something. "No, ma'am." "He's not. He was just helping." But no sound came out, because when Vivian Sloane was moving, you did not step in front of her. Elias looked up at her. He took her in the way he took in everything, without judgment and without hurry. The tailored suit and the exhausted eyes and the folio held like a shield. And he understood almost everything about her in the space of that 1 second. The pressure she was under, The fear underneath the steel, the way she had learned to survive by mistaking speed for strength. And he did the thing that would, in about 1 hour, become the most quietly devastating thing anyone had done to her in years. He smiled. It was not a cruel smile, or a knowing one, or the smile of a man holding a card he hadn't played. It was just kind. Of course, he said, wouldn't want anyone slipping. And he went back to cleaning the floor. Vivian was already turning away. She had registered the, of course, as compliance and filed the man underhandled, and her mind had moved on to the seating arrangement and the order of signatures and whether the financing confirmation had come through from the lender. She pushed through the boardroom doors. She did not look back. The cost of those 2 words would not arrive for another 58 minutes, and when it did, it would not arrive as a slap. It would arrive as a silence so total she could hear the building breathe. A small crowd had gathered the way crowds do when something slightly uncomfortable happens in public. 2 executives who had come up for the reception. A few staffers. They had seen the CEO order a man in shirt sleeves to clean the floor, and they had felt the second-hand sting of it, and now they did not know where to put their eyes. Elias finished the job. He gathered the ceramic, mopped the last of the coffee, wrung the towels into the cart's bucket, and rolled the cart neatly back against the wall. He washed his hands at a small kitchenette down the hall. Then he put his jacket back on, checked his watch, and found a chair in a quiet alcove to wait, because it was only 10:40 and he was, after all, early. His phone buzzed. A text from Mia's school, the automated kind, reminding him of the spring concert next Tuesday. He smiled at it. Then a second buzz. Marcus. You there yet? Their board chair just called me twice. Everyone's tense. Where are you? Elias typed back. I'm here. Floor's clean. Tell them to relax. Marcus would not understand that for another hour. The boardroom on the 30th floor was not designed for panic, and so panic was performing very poorly in it. The table was long, and the chairs were leather, and the view through the windows was the kind real estate agents described with words like commanding. Around the table sat the people who would close the deal. Dana Reyes, Halcyon's general counsel, a careful woman who chose her words the way a surgeon chooses instruments. Theo Marsh, Vivian's chief of staff, young and sharp and visibly running on caffeine. Eleanor Price, the board chair, 61 years old with the kind of face that had stopped flinching at bad news a long time ago. And 3 more directors who had flown in for the signing. Folders sat squared at every place. A bound copy of the definitive agreement, 411 pages of representations and warranties and covenants and closing conditions, sat at the head of the table where the buyer would sit. Vivian stood at the windows with her back to the room, running through the sequence in her head. The plan was clean. The lantern team would arrive, pleasantries, the signing of the definitive purchase agreement, the photographs no one would actually use, and then the long, quiet work of closing over the following weeks, the regulatory approvals, and the third-party consents, and the transition. After today, the company would be safe. After today, she could finally sleep. Mr. Webb's car is downstairs, Theo said, checking his phone. ETA 2 minutes. He says the rest of the lantern team is already in the building. A pause. He frowned at the phone. He says the principal is already up here. The principal. Vivian turned from the window. Reed himself is coming? I thought he never attended these. Marcus Webb signs for lantern. Not on this one, Eleanor Price said, and there was something in the board chair's voice, a faint dryness that should have warned Vivian if she had been listening for it. Lantern's structured, so the controlling owner has to personally execute any acquisition over $1 billion. Reed founded the firm. He owns the controlling interest outright. Marcus runs the place day to day, but on a deal this size, Reed signs. Or there's no deal. She folded her hands. I told you this in the board memo, Vivian. Page 3. Vivian had read page 3 at 2 in the morning and remembered none of it. Fine. Then where is he? If he's in the building, bring him up. Theo, call down and... I think, said Dana Reyes slowly, looking at her own phone now, at an email that had just arrived from Lantern's counsel. An email with an attachment. An email that contained a photograph someone in the lobby had apparently taken on their phone and forwarded with a single line of text. Is this who I think it is? I think he's already up here, Vivian. What are you talking about? Dana turned her phone around. The photograph was slightly blurry, taken from across the lobby corridor, but it was clear enough. It showed a man in shirt sleeves crouched on the white marble floor, a janitor's cart beside him, a roll of paper towels in his hand, mopping up a spreading stain of coffee, and standing over him, one finger pointed down at the floor, mouth caught mid-word, was the unmistakable charcoal silhouette of the chief executive officer of Halcyon Dynamics. The caption underneath, the one Lantern's counsel had typed, read, Elias Reed. He arrived early. Your CEO just had him clean the floor. The boardroom went silent. It was the specific silence of educated people encountering a problem their education had not prepared them for. Eleanor Price closed her eyes. Theo Marsh made a sound like a small animal stepping on something sharp. Dana Reyes set her phone face down on the table with the gentleness of a woman diffusing a device. Vivian Sloane looked at the photograph and felt the floor of her stomach drop out from underneath her. She knew the name. Of course she knew the name. Elias Reed was the man whose $2 billion was supposed to save her company, the reclusive owner of Lantern Holdings, the investor everyone in finance had heard of and almost no one had met, the man who turned down interviews and skipped conferences and was, by every account, the only thing standing between Halcyon Dynamics and the abyss. She had spent 4 months negotiating against his lawyers. She had built her entire strategy around getting his signature on page 411, and 40 minutes ago, she had pointed at a floor and told him to clean it. That's not... She started. That's not possible. He was the cleaner. He was crouched on the floor with a cart. He was helping a kid who dropped a tray, Theo said quietly, because he had heard it now from the staffer who'd seen the whole thing. The cart was already there. He took off his jacket and he was helping clean up so no one would slip. And then, Theo stopped. He did not finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The CFO, a man named Holt, who had said almost nothing all morning, leaned forward with the careful tone of a man doing arithmetic he did not want to do. Walk me through this. The buyer, the man whose personal signature we need, the man who is, by reputation, famous for walking away from deals where he doesn't like the way leadership treats people. He looked at Vivian. That man. You told him to clean the floor, in front of witnesses, 40 minutes before he was supposed to sign. He didn't say anything, Vivian said, and even as the words left her, she heard how small they were. He didn't tell me who he was. Why wouldn't he say something? Why would he? Eleanor Price opened her eyes. The board chair's voice was not unkind, but it was clear. You didn't ask. You don't ask, Vivian. That's rather the entire problem we're discovering this morning. She let that sit. Elias Reed has reportedly killed 3 deals at the signing table, walked out of rooms with everything on paper and ready to execute, because he decided the people running the company couldn't be trusted with it. There's a clause in our agreement, Dana, isn't there? A founder's discretion provision. The personal sign-off. Dana Reyes nodded slowly. Section 22. It's unusual, but Lantern insisted on it, and we had no leverage to refuse. It gives the controlling principal the right to decline to execute up until the moment of signing, without penalty, for any reason or no reason. We have a financing window that closes in 9 days. We have a regulatory clock. If he doesn't sign today... She did not finish either. There were a lot of unfinished sentences in the room that morning. Theo did the math out loud, because someone had to. If he walks, there's no other buyer at this price in this window. The next offer on the table was $900 million, and it came from a firm that's already told the board it would close the medical division and sell off the real estate. If Reed walks, Halcyon either takes that offer and gets gutted, or it doesn't, and it runs out of cash by the end of the quarter. He looked at the table. 4,000 jobs. That division, all of it, comes down to whether a man we just humiliated decides to sign anyway. The silence came back, and this time it had teeth. Vivian Sloane stood very still in the middle of it, and for the first time in a very long time, she did not have a fast answer. She thought about the man crouched on the floor. She thought about the way he had looked up at her, and how she had read his expression as nothing, as the blank face of staff, and how she now understood that the something she had refused to see was that he had looked at her and understood her completely, and decided, in that moment, not to embarrass her. He had simply smiled and cleaned the floor. Of course. Wouldn't want anyone slipping. He had handed her a kindness, and she had not even noticed it land. She had built a 14-year career on being the person who never missed anything, and she had just missed the only thing in the building that mattered. "Get him," she said. Her voice had changed. The steel was still there, but it was holding something now, the way a wall holds a flood. "Theo, go find Mr. Reed and ask him, politely with his name, if he would be willing to join us." She straightened her folio. She straightened her spine. "And get a fresh tray of coffee up here. Carry it yourself." Elias was still in the alcove when Theo Marsh found him, sitting with the unhurried stillness of a man who had nowhere he needed to be for the next 20 minutes. Theo approached the way you approach a sleeping dog you have heard things about. "Mr. Reed." Theo's voice cracked slightly on the name. "I'm Theo Marsh, Chief of Staff. Sir, I owe you an apology, and so does... we all do. The meeting room is ready whenever you... I'm so sorry about the..." He gestured helplessly toward the corridor where the floor was now spotless, cleaned by the very man he was apologizing to. Elias stood and shrugged on his jacket. "What's your name again?" "Theo, sir." "Theo. Is the kid who dropped the tray in trouble?" The question caught Theo completely off guard. I don't know. Maybe. He's pretty shaken up." "Make sure he isn't," Elias said. "It was an accident. The floor had a lip in it that nobody would have noticed. That's a building problem, not a person problem." He said it mildly, but Theo would think about it for a long time afterward, the way the most powerful man in the building had walked in, and the first thing on his mind was the junior assistant nobody else had spared a thought for. "Lead the way." He walked into the boardroom at 4 minutes to 11. The room rose. All of them, the directors and the council and the CFO, came to their feet in a wave, and the wave had the specific quality of people who had just realized exactly how badly they had begun the most important morning of their year. Elias took it in. The squared folders, the bound agreement at the head of the table, the city framed in glass behind them, the fresh tray of coffee that Theo had indeed carried up himself and set down with shaking hands. And he took in Vivian Sloane, standing at the head of the table, looking at him. She was different from the woman who had pointed at the floor. Not dramatically. There was no visible groveling, no theater of remorse. But something had reorganized itself behind her eyes, and it was the particular difference that happens to a person when the ground they were standing on turns out to be water. "Mr. Reed," she said. The room held its breath again. "I'm Vivian Sloane. I'm the CEO of Halcyon Dynamics." She paused. "And about an hour ago, I pointed at a floor and told you to clean it. I made a decision about who you were in under 2 seconds, without a single piece of accurate information, and I was wrong, and I'm sorry. Not because of who you turned out to be, because of who I assumed you were, and how little that assumption cost me to make." She held his eyes. "I'd like to start this meeting over if you'll allow it, but I understand if you've already decided how this ends." It was, Elias thought, a better apology than most. She had not made it about the deal. She had not begged. She had named the actual thing, The snap judgment, the cheapness of it, and she had not tried to hide behind not knowing. He had heard 1,000 apologies in his life, most of them about damage control, and he could tell the difference between the ones that were sorry they got caught and the ones that were sorry they did it. This one was closer to the second than he had expected. He let the silence run for a moment, because he had learned the value of a silence from a woman who used to live in his house, and because he wanted to watch what Vivian Sloane did when she was not in control of the room. She did not fill it. She did not flinch. She held it. That told him something. "Okay," he said finally. The flatness of it was not dismissive. It was simply acknowledgement, set down between them like a coin on a table. He pulled out the chair at the head of the room, the buyer's chair, and he sat. He reached into the inner pocket of his canvas jacket and took out a pen. It was not an expensive pen. It was a slim black fountain pen, worn smooth at the grip, the kind of object that has been held by the same hand for many years. He set it on the table beside the bound agreement. "Before I open this," he said, and his voice was easy and conversational, and somehow that made the room more nervous than shouting would have. "I want to tell all of you why I'm here, because I think Ms. Sloane assumes I'm here for the floor. I'm not." He opened the agreement to the first page and did not read it. He looked at the table instead, at all of them. 11 years ago, a woman named Sarah designed a device in this building. It's about the size of 2 coins stacked on top of each other. It goes under the skin of a child whose heart doesn't keep time correctly, and it watches that heart all night, every night, so the kid's parents can close their eyes. She worked on the second floor of the medical division. She kept a photograph of a sailboat taped to her monitor, and she could not parallel park to save her life, and she believed that the only point of being good at something was using it for people who couldn't do it themselves. He turned the pen over once in his fingers. Halcyon was going to cancel that division. I read it in a footnote in your own restructuring plan. Line item: discontinue legacy pediatric monitoring. Low margin. 400 children a year get that device. The next cheapest version costs 9 times as much, and most insurance won't touch it. He looked up. Sarah was my wife. She died 4 years ago. She is the reason I'm buying this company, and the device is the reason I'm not letting anyone close that division. And I would have paid more than $2 billion if you'd had the nerve to ask for it. No one said a word. Vivian Sloane had gone pale. Eleanor Price was looking at Elias with an expression that had moved past surprise into something that resembled respect tinged with grief. "So here's where we are," Elias said, and his voice was kind, but it was the kind of kind that does not bend. "I came in early this morning to walk this building, because I do that before every deal that matters. I walk the floors, and I watch how people treat each other when they think no one important is looking. It's the only piece of due diligence I trust completely, because spreadsheets lie and people don't, not when they think you don't matter." He looked at Vivian. "And about an hour ago, a CEO pointed at a floor and told a man she'd never met to clean it, because she'd decided he was beneath her notice. And every reasonable instinct I have is telling me that's exactly the kind of leadership I walk away from." The room stopped breathing entirely. This was it. This was the moment Theo had done the math about. 4,000 jobs, the division, Sarah's device, all of it balanced on the point of a worn black pen. "But," Elias said. He picked up the pen. "But I've spent 4 months reading what you actually did with this company, Mrs. Sloane, instead of just what you said in the meetings. You inherited a mess 2 years ago that 3 men before you made and ran from. You kept the medical division open for 18 months past when the board wanted it closed, fighting them, losing the fight slowly, because you didn't want to be the one who killed it. That's in the records too. The footnote that scheduled the discontinuation wasn't yours. You filed 2 memos against it." He uncapped the pen. "I think you're a person who's been mistaking speed for strength because you've been drowning for 2 years and nobody threw you a rope. I think you treated me like furniture this morning because you've stopped seeing anything that isn't a fire. That's not a virtue. But it's not the same thing as cruelty either, and I've learned to tell the difference. He looked down at page 411. And I am not going to put 4,000 people out of work and let a division full of children's devices die to teach one tired executive a lesson about manners. That would make me exactly the kind of person who points at floors. And Elias Reed picked up the pen, and he signed the acquisition papers. The signature was small and unhurried. The scratch of the nib was the only sound in the room. When he finished, he capped the pen and slid the bound agreement down the table toward Dana Reyes, who took it with the careful reverence of a woman accepting a relic. And the room exhaled all at once. 4,000 jobs worth of breath, releasing into the commanding view. Vivian Sloan sat down slowly in her chair. She had spent the last 58 minutes preparing for the worst conversation of her career, and instead, she had been handed her company's survival by the man she had humiliated, along with a more accurate description of herself than anyone had offered her in 2 years. She did not know what to do with her face. It was perhaps the first time in a long while that Vivian Sloan had not known what to do with her face. "Mr. Reed," she said, "thank you. I don't have the—" "Don't thank me yet," Elias said. And now, for the first time, there was the faint edge of humor in it, dry and unexpected. "I'm keeping the medical division, and I'm taking a board seat to make sure no footnote ever tries to kill it again. Which means you and I are going to be working together for a while." He stood, and he tucked the worn black pen back into the inner pocket of his ordinary canvas jacket. "So, I'd suggest you find out who I am before you point at me next time." There was a beat. And then Eleanor Price, the 61-year-old board chair, who had not laughed in a meeting in approximately a decade, made a short, startled sound that was unmistakably a laugh, and the tension in the room broke like a fever. The deal signed at 11:06 in the morning. By that afternoon, the news that Lantern Holdings had acquired Halcyon Dynamics moved through the financial press in the dry language of press releases: strategic acquisition, continuity of operations, no immediate changes to leadership. The press release did not mention the floor. The press release did not mention the device or the woman who had designed it, or the fact that the controlling principal had signed with a fountain pen that had belonged to his late wife. The press release mentioned none of the things that actually happened, which is generally true of press releases. What happened in the weeks that followed was quieter, and it took the shape of a person changing, which is the slowest and least cinematic thing in the world. Vivian Sloan did not send a company-wide email about her leadership journey. She did not commission a humility workshop. She simply began to behave differently, in increments so small that at first only Theo Marsh noticed, and Theo noticed because noticing was his entire job. She started asking the names of people before she asked them for things. She started waiting one extra beat before responding to things that annoyed her, which turned out to be most things, and discovering that in that extra beat, about a third of her annoyances dissolved on their own. She walked the medical division on the second floor herself, the one she had spent 2 years fighting to keep open from inside a conference room, and she found Sarah Reed's old workstation, now occupied by a young engineer named Priya. And she stood and listened for 40 minutes while the engineer explained how the monitor worked, and she did not look at her phone once. Eleanor Price noticed second, the way patient observers always notice second. She mentioned it to no one. She simply watched the youngest CEO in the company's history stop confusing decisiveness with intelligence, and she kept her own counsel, and she renewed her board seat for another term. Elias took his board seat at Halcyon the following month, but he did not behave the way board members behaved. He came to the medical division before he came to the executive floor. He learned the names of the technicians who calibrated the monitors. He found the junior assistant who had dropped the tray, a young man named Caleb, and discovered that Caleb was working 2 jobs to pay for night classes. And Elias quietly made sure the company's tuition assistance program, which had been suspended in the restructuring, was the first thing reinstated after the closing. He did not announce it. He simply did it, the way he did most things, And Caleb found out from a letter and spent a long time staring at it at his own kitchen table. The closing of the acquisition took 6 weeks. The slow, grinding work of regulatory approvals and third-party consents, and the 1,000 small clearances that stand between signing and the actual transfer of a company. Elias and Vivian found themselves in the same rooms often during those 6 weeks. The first few meetings were stiff, the way meetings are when one person has seen the other at their absolute worst and chosen grace anyway. There is a particular awkwardness to being forgiven for something you cannot undo, and Vivian moved through it the way she moved through everything, by working harder. Until one afternoon, Elias set down a stack of transition documents and said, "You don't have to keep proving you're not the person who pointed at the floor. I already know you're not. You're the only one still convinced you are." She looked at him across the table. "That obvious? You apologize with your whole body. You've apologized to me 11 separate times in 6 weeks, and only one of them used words." She almost smiled. It was a near thing. "I'm not used to being read this accurately. It's deeply uncomfortable." "It's the only piece of due diligence I trust," he said, and this time she did smile, and it changed her whole face, and Elias Reed noticed that, and then noticed that he had noticed, and filed the observation away somewhere he did not look at too directly. It was Mia, in the end, who pushed the thing across the line it had been hovering near for weeks, because Mia did not believe in lines. Elias had brought his daughter to the building one Saturday in early autumn, because the medical division was running a small open house for families, and because he wanted Mia to see the place where her mother had worked. He had not told her much about Sarah's job over the years, only that her mother had built tiny machines that helped sick kids, and Mia had carried that around for years with the solemn pride of a child who has been given a piece of the truth and trusted with it. They walked the second floor together, Elias and his 7-year-old, and he showed her the workstation where Sarah used to sit, and the model of the monitor in the display case, and Mia pressed her face against the glass and looked at the tiny device the size of 2 coins for a long time. "This is the one Mom made? This is the one. It's so small. The best things usually are." And that was when Vivian Sloan came around the corner of the division floor, not in a charcoal suit, but in jeans and a soft sweater, holding a paper cup of coffee, looking like a person who had recently given herself permission to walk somewhere without an agenda. She had come in on a Saturday because she could not stop coming to this division, the one she had nearly lost, and she stopped when she saw them, the man and the small girl with her face pressed to the glass. Mia turned. Children have a radar that adults lose, less cynical and more precise, and Mia aimed hers at the woman in the soft sweater and looked her over with frank, unhurried attention. "Are you the lady who told my dad to clean the floor?" Mia asked. The entire history of the universe seemed to pause. Vivian, to her enormous credit, did not look at Elias for rescue. She crouched down to Mia's level, the way Elias did, and she met the 7-year-old's eyes directly. "Yes," she said, "I'm afraid I am. It was a very rude thing to do, and I felt terrible about it." Mia considered this with the seriousness of a judge weighing evidence. "Did you say sorry?" "I did, several times actually." "With words?" Vivian blinked. "At least once with words, yes." Mia nodded slowly, satisfied that due process had been observed. Then, because she was 7, and because 7-year-olds close all avenues of disagreement with a single sentence, she said, "My dad cleans the floor at home too. He says a clean floor is a kind thing to give people. So, you accidentally asked him to be kind." She turned back to the glass, the matter resolved entirely in everyone's favor. "He's good at it." Vivian Sloan straightened up slowly, and when she looked at Elias, her composure had a crack running through it, and behind the crack was something that looked a great deal like the beginning of a laugh and the beginning of tears, arriving at exactly the same moment. Elias was looking at his daughter with the helpless love of a man who has long since stopped being surprised by her and never stopped being amazed. "She's not wrong," he said. "She's terrifying," Vivian said. "She's going to run a country someday. She's going to run several. I've made my peace with it." They stood there in the medical division on a Saturday, the three of them, while families with sick children moved gently through the room around them, and the small device that Sarah Reed had designed sat in its case being exactly as small and exactly as important as it had always been. And something shifted in the air between the two adults, the kind of shift that does not announce itself, that you only recognize later when you look back and try to find the moment it began. "I owe you a dinner," Vivian said. It came out before she had fully decided to say it. "I've been told it's customary to feed people who save your company. Both of you," she added quickly, glancing at Mia. If that's a reasonable thing to offer." Mia looked up at her father with the expression of a person who had already decided the outcome and was waiting, with visible impatience, for the slower adult to catch up. Elias looked at his daughter. He looked at Sarah's device in its case. He looked at Vivian Sloane, holding her paper coffee cup in both hands now, the way a person holds something when they have asked a real question and prepared themselves for a real answer. "We eat early," he said. 6 o'clock. I make spaghetti with too much garlic. It makes you cry." "That's the onions," Vivian said. "See, you're already smarter than most of my board." It was not a yes, but it was very far from a no. And in the long, careful arithmetic of two guarded people measuring the distance between what had been and what might be, the difference between those two things was almost nothing at all. The dinner happened, and then another. The first one was at Elias's apartment, which was smaller and plainer than anything in Vivian's world, with a refrigerator covered in Mia's drawings and a single corner of the living room that belonged entirely to a chaos of crayons and stuffed animals organized by a logic only their owner understood. Vivian arrived in flat shoes, having learned her lesson about the building's marble in more ways than one. And she sat at the small kitchen table and ate spaghetti that did in fact make her cry. And she listened while Mia delivered an unbroken 40-minute monologue about the social politics of the second grade, the injustice of assigned seating, and the unparalleled excellence of her best friend Hazel. "Hazel sounds important," Vivian said. "Hazel is the most important person at the entire school," Mia said gravely, "including the principal. I'll make a note." Later, after Mia had been put to bed with the elaborate ceremony of a child stalling expertly for time, the two adults sat at the table with the dishes cleared and the city pressing its light against the window, and they talked the way people talk when the performance has been set down somewhere out of reach. Vivian told him about being 31 and handed a dying company by a board that expected her to fail so they could blame a woman for the men's mistakes. She told him how being constantly underestimated had not made her gentle with other people the way it should have, but hard, because she had decided that the only way to survive being dismissed was to never be slow enough to be dismissed again. She heard the irony as she said it. She had spent her whole career furious at people who looked at her and saw less than she was. And the first chance she got, she had pointed at a floor and done the exact same thing to someone else. "I keep thinking about it," she said. "The way you smiled. You smiled at me, and you cleaned the floor, and you didn't say anything, and I couldn't figure out for the longest time why that bothered me more than if you'd been furious, and I finally got it." She turned her wine glass without drinking from it. "You smiled because you'd already forgiven me before I even knew I'd done anything wrong. You didn't need me to suffer through it. That's the most disarming thing anyone has ever done to me. And you did it by accident, with a roll of paper towels." Elias was quiet for a moment. "It wasn't an accident," he said. "Sarah taught me that. Before her, I kept score. I was good at it, keeping score. It's most of what finance is. And she used to look at me when I was holding on to being wronged about something small, and she'd say, 'Elias, you're going to spend your one life being right about a parking space.'" He smiled at the table. She died, and I had a 1-year-old, and I decided I was done spending my life being right about parking spaces. There isn't enough time. There was never going to be enough time. So I stopped. He looked up. When you pointed at the floor, I had a choice between being right about a floor and being kind to a tired stranger. It wasn't a hard choice. It hasn't been a hard choice in 4 years. Vivian looked at him for a long moment across the small kitchen table, in the apartment full of crayon drawings, and something in her chest that had been clenched for the better part of a decade quietly, finally, unclenched. The relationship that grew between them after that grew the way the right things grow, slowly and without drama, in the ordinary spaces between obligations. It was not a story of grand gestures. It was a story of Vivian learning the names of Mia's stuffed animals, and Elias discovering that the terrifying CEO could not, in fact, parallel park, which made him laugh so hard the first time he saw it that she refused to speak to him for the length of an entire restaurant meal. It was a story of 3 people learning to occupy the same space, the unconscious choreography of a household being built out of limited materials by people who were proud of it, even if none of them would have used that word. There was an evening, weeks later, when Mia was asleep and the dishes were done, and the apartment had gone soft and golden in the late light, and Vivian was standing by the window with a cup of tea, and Elias came and stood beside her, and neither of them said anything for a while. Then she set the cup down, and he turned toward her, and she turned toward him, and the distance between what had been and what might be finally closed, quietly, in a kitchen that smelled of garlic, and the city kept moving outside the window, the way it always did, indifferent and luminous, while inside, 2 careful people stopped being careful for a little while. The rest belonged to them, and it stayed there, behind a gently closing door. The weeks that followed were ordinary in the way that good aftermath is always ordinary. Halcyon dynamics stabilized. The medical division did not close. It expanded, and the pediatric monitor that Sarah Reed had designed went into a new production run. And somewhere, a few hundred parents got to sleep through the night without knowing the name of the man who had signed a piece of paper with a fountain pen to make it happen. Vivian Sloan remained CEO and grew into the kind of leader who learned the names first, and the board, watching her, quietly stopped looking for a reason to replace her. Elias kept his board seat and kept his 10-year-old car with the dent named Gerald, and kept driving Mia to school every morning, and kept his promise about dinner every single night, because some promises you make to a 7-year-old turn out to be the load-bearing walls of an entire life. It was a Saturday afternoon in October when the last piece of it settled into place, the kind of afternoon that announces autumn without apology, all low golden light and the smell of leaves that have decided to let go. Brightwater Elementary was holding its fall showcase, and Elias arrived 12 minutes early as he always did and found a spot along the wall with clear sight lines, because some habits never leave you. And Mia had appeared in the wings of the small stage, scanning the rows of folding chairs with the focused intensity of a child, checking that her people were where they were supposed to be. She found Elias first. She waved in the enormous, unmodulated way of a child who has not yet learned that happiness costs anything to show. And then the gymnasium doors opened, and Vivian Sloan came in. Not in a charcoal suit, in a soft coat, unbuttoned, holding a paper coffee cup, moving at the pace of someone who had finally learned how to walk somewhere without a war waiting at the end of it. She scanned the rows, found Elias against the wall, and made her way over and stood beside him. And the 2 of them looked toward the stage where the small girl who had cross-examined a CEO about floor cleaning etiquette was now standing very straight, the way she always stood, having quietly decided some years ago to hold herself together, the way she had watched her father do it. Mia saw Vivian. Her whole face opened into the uncomplicated delight of a child who is simply glad to see someone, with no further calculation required, and she waved at her too. Vivian raised her hand in return, a small gesture that cost nothing and meant more than she had expected it to mean. more than she had words for, standing in a school gymnasium on an ordinary October afternoon. "You know," Vivian said quietly, as the lights came up on the little stage, "I spent 14 years building a life where nobody could ever point at me and decide who I was." She watched the girl on the stage, and then I pointed at the one person who was going to teach me everything I'd gotten wrong about it. She glanced sideways at Elias. "You're aware that you're the most expensive lesson I've ever paid for. $2 billion. 2.1, Elias said. "You undersold the company. I keep telling you." She laughed, a real one, the kind that catches you off guard. And on the stage, Mia began to recite her lines in the clear, unself-conscious voice of a child who has not yet learned to doubt that the room is on her side. Elias felt Vivian settle into the space beside him, her shoulder against his, her eyes on the stage, and he thought about a floor and a pen and a woman who had pointed at the wrong man on the right morning, and how the smallest decisions, the ones we make in under 2 seconds without thinking, are so often the ones that turn out to hold the whole weight of a life. He did not say any of that. Some things do not need to be said in school gymnasiums. He just reached over, in the dark, and found her hand and held it, while his daughter delivered her lines to a room full of strangers who had no idea they were watching the quietest, most ordinary, most complete happy ending that two careful people had ever built out of a spilled cup of coffee. The show ended. The room applauded. Mia took a bow far too elaborate for her role and found them both in the crowd and beamed. And if you ever find yourself standing in a lobby someday, in a hurry, with 100 fires burning and no time to spare, and you see someone you've decided doesn't matter, a person in plain clothes doing a humble thing, do yourself one small favor before you point at them and tell them what they are. Ask their name. You genuinely never know who is standing in front of you. You never know who's about to pick up a pen. If this story moved you, if you believe the smallest moments of kindness and judgment are the ones that change everything, do me a favor and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you never miss a story. And tell me in the comments, have you ever underestimated someone and been completely beautifully wrong? I read every single one. I'll see you in the next story.